Hi, this is Eli Krantzberg, and welcome to this Groove 3 series on Apple Loops. Now, whether you're new to Logic or an experienced user, I think there'll be something for everyone in this series. We're going to take a look at Apple Loops right from the ground up, and I'll spend the first half of the series kind of going over the basics of how they work and how to use them. And then we're going to get into some creative aspects. So let me start by answering the question, what exactly are Apple Loops and why should I care about them? Well, Apple Loops are pre-recorded musical phrases or riffs that we access in the loop browser. Now, that's the simple one-line definition. They can be a lot more than that, but that's the textbook definition of what they are. Now, these loops contain musical patterns, and they can be repeated over and over, and they can be extended or looped to fill any amount of time from a couple of bars till your whole song length if you want. Now, what's great about Apple Loops is the regions play back at the project tempo. So if they're drum loops, you don't have to worry about the tempo. They'll play back at whatever tempo you need. And for musical material, they'll play back at whatever tempo and whatever key you need. Now, we access Apple Loops in the loop browser. We can get to it from this icon over here. And the shortcut is the letter O to open it. And it's basically a database with search criteria and results in the bottom part here. We have two different views of the search criteria at the top. The results list stays the same. And we can resize this to be a bit wider, which I think I'll do since we're going to be focusing on this. Now, we have four different types of Apple Loops. We have audio Apple Loops, which are blue, like you see here, and we can click on them and audition them. Click again and it'll stop. And you'll notice that it's auditioning at the project tempo. If I slow this down, it'll play it back slower. And anywhere in between. Now we can drag these onto an existing audio track, or we can drag it to an empty space and it'll create an audio track and it'll play it back from the main view. Again, at any tempo we want. Now, those are blue Apple Loops. We have green Apple Loops, and those are software instrument Apple Loops, and they're different in that they can play back either on an audio track as an audio file or on an instrument track as MIDI. And when we call it up, we call up the sound as well as the notes contained within a region. Now, I can drag this to an instrument track and it'll call it up that way, or I can drag it to an audio track and it'll convert it to audio. Well, let's bring it onto this instrument track, and we'll see that when I release the mouse, it calls up the sound and all the necessary settings in order to get the sound. And if we look in the piano roll editor, we'll see that we have basic MIDI notes. And I can transpose one or both of them if necessary. One's in A minor, one's in C, so they sort of kind of work together already as is. And the great thing about these software instrument Apple Loops is that I can now change the sound if I want to play this back on a different sound or with different processing, or I can change the notes if I like the sound but want to change the notes to fit more of my song. Now, the next type of Apple Loops are drummer Apple Loops. They're yellow, and they call up drummer tracks. Now, I can scroll here till I get to some, but I can also use this to filter the different types of loops. And here they are: audio, software instrument, pattern loops, which we'll get to in a moment, and drummer loops. So I'll click there, and now I see only those. And again, I can audition them. And if I drag this to an empty track, it's going to call up a drummer track with the appropriate drummer and settings called up. And then we can play it back, and it'll sound just as it did here. And again, we have the flexibility now of changing the pattern, changing the sounds, changing the drummer, or dragging this to an instrument track and getting the MIDI notes so we can edit it. So lots of versatility. These are just starting off points. Now, the next kind are pattern loops. And again, I can scroll till I get to them, but I'm going to use the filters here. I'm going to click there. Now I'm seeing both of those, but I'm going to get rid of the drummer ones. So I see just the pattern loops, and they have this little icon that looks like a step sequencer. And some of them are drums, some of them are pitched. Let's take that, and I'll drag this into an empty space. It's going to call up software instrument track, and instead of calling up MIDI notes, it calls up step sequencer pattern. And again, I can play this and transpose or change whatever I need to. So there I've dragged 4 disparate loops, each of different types, and they all kind of sort of work together with a little bit of tweaking. They could be interesting. Now, to get my display back, I can click here and I can go all loops, or I can simply click there to toggle the status and they'll all come back on. So we can add to the selection by clicking like that, or remove. And as soon as you uncheck the last one, they're all back. Or we can, of course, just click all loops. Now, I'm going to end off here, and I just want to mention that if you want to learn more about the step sequencer and patterns, check out the Logic Pro 10.5 and 10.6 Update Explained series here on Groove 3. There's a lot of detail on it. And if you want to learn more about the drummers and drummer tracks, we have a dedicated series on Logic Pro's drummer here as well. And here's a little tip. If you're into working with drummers and the drummer track, the Loop Browser is a great way to audition the different drummer patterns with their sounds without having to load in the drummer tracks individually. I'll see you for more in the next video. I want to talk a little bit about the preview channel and the auto leveling feature in this video. Now, here are the Apple loops that I dragged in the last video, and I haven't touched anything in the mixer, and I want to open it and show you what's going on. You'll notice that there are different levels happening. Now, there's an auto leveling feature, which means when we audition loops here, Logic does its best to play them back all at the same level approximately, so there's no big jumps in volume in your monitoring. Just jumping around at random. And they're all relatively consistent, whether they're software instrument, pattern loops, audio, and so on. Now, to get that function, we have an auto leveling feature that we can access in this action menu. And here it is, auto leveling. It's on by default, but you can turn it off if you want. Now, one of the really interesting features of auto leveling is that when you drag an audio loop to create a new track, like for example, I'll drag this over here, you're going to notice the volume is at 0.1, and I'll explain to you why that is in a moment. But more importantly, we have the region gain here that is set based on the auto leveling algorithm so that the volume is consistent. Now here I dragged this in the last video, and here the region gain is set uniquely for that, and this is again at 0.1. And for the software instruments, in this case, there's no region gain available for MIDI, so it just automatically adjusts the level of the channel strip. And same thing for the pattern loop here, because it's an instrument channel strip, there's no region gain, so it adjusts the level here. Now, when we audition from the Loop Browser, let's look at where the audio is coming from. If we hit X to open the mixer, it defaults to opening in tracks view, where we see only the tracks that are set up in the tracks area over here. But if we go to all view, we're going to see all of the channel strips that exist in this project. And by default, every new project has a preview channel strip, and you'll see it's in solo safe mode with that line through the S, and we control click to put a channel strip in solo safe mode, but you want that in solo safe, so it'll always be heard no matter what's soloed in your mixer or tracks area. And fun fact, in the all view, we'll also see the click channel strip that hosts the Klopfgeist for the click or metronome in Logic, and that's also in solo safe mode, and also where you can access it if you want to make any changes. Now, the reason that we always get the 0.1 here is just that's the way that Logic's algorithm is programmed when the preview is at 0, which is the default level, and you don't really need or want to change that. When we drag audio Apple loops, it just defaults to 0.1. So if we click on these, you'll see it playing back in the preview channel. Now let's turn off auto leveling. And it's a lot louder. I'm going to close the mixer, and if I drag this now to another track, we're going to see that this is at 0.1 and the region gain is unchanged. Whereas here, when I dragged in the previous loop, it is adjusted here, and you can see very easily in the display the difference in playback level. And of course, if I zeroed this out, it'd be the same. Now we have this level slider here to adjust the level of playback. And if we open the mixer, you'll see that that's kind of just a remote control for the preview channel. So I'm going to option click there and snap it to 0, so it's back to the default. And then we have the preview button here. or we can stop and start the preview when we're parked on one of these. But when you click on one, it's going to start automatically. So you can stop it either by clicking again or by clicking that. And I want to point out one other little housekeeping aspect of Apple Loops. If you're scrolling through your browser and you see some of them grayed out, you can click a little arrow sign to download them individually. But it's a good idea when you're especially doing a new Logic Pro installation, but at any time, to double check here that you have all of your Apple Loops installed. So under Sound Library, we can go open Sound Library Manager, and this will be enabled or highlighted if there is content that is not installed on your system. Right now I have everything installed, so that's grayed out. But we have a specific category here for Apple Loops where you can open up and get all the different families of Apple Loops, and then you can install them or reinstall them if necessary. And these correspond to the loop packs that we'll see over here, and we'll talk about that more in another video. So that's it for now. Now you know about the auto leveling feature, which I'm going to enable and leave on, and the preview channel that we get at in All View. See you for more in the next video. I want to talk a little bit about Apple Loop housekeeping and where files are located on your hard drive. Now, I mentioned here that we have these loop packs and we can filter by these. And if you have everything installed, yours should look something like this. Some of these are from older installs of Logic Pro, so you may not have your list looking exactly like this, but these are the basic loop packs. And I want to show you where they're stored on the hard drive. So in the Finder, at the root level of your hard drive, I've named mine My Universe, you're going to have your main library folder. And in there is a subfolder called Audio, and in there, Apple Loops, and in there, Apple. And here you can see all the categories or families or packs of loops that we have. And if you click in there, you're going to see all the actual files .caf for core audio format. So those are all the factory Apple Loops that are installed. Now for your own Apple Loops, user Apple Loops that you might create on your own, which we're going to look at later in the series, they're stored in a different place in your user folder inside the library folder in there. So user, then library, then the corresponding audio folder, and then Apple Loops, user loops, and then you'll have any original Apple Loops that you've created on your own. Now, back in Logic, you'll recall that I've dragged in several Apple Loops in the last couple of videos. Well, I'm going to switch to my project browser view for the project audio, and you're going to see some of these files over here that I've dragged in. And these are the audio Apple Loops. Obviously, the MIDI and pattern and drummer Apple Loops have no corresponding audio file, so there's nothing to appear in the project browser. Now, I've saved this project, but let's look at what's happened in the project folder. I'm going to open the enclosing folder, and if we look in the audio files, we're going to see it's empty. There's nothing in there. Now, why is that? Why isn't this saved with the project? Well, it's factory content, and by default, it's on your hard drive and you'll be able to access it. But if you do want to save it with your project, you can always go into Project Settings, Assets, and then if we enable Copy Apple Sound Library Content into Project, it'll now copy these files into your project folder. So I'm going to hit Save again. And now if I go back to this same folder, if we look in audio files, we're going to see those files copied there. So it's a good idea to save your Apple Loops with your project if there's a remote chance that they won't be accessible on your drive anymore. Now, one other setting I want to draw your attention to, if we go to Project Settings and Audio, you'll see a checkbox here for Apple Loops High Quality on the General tab. And that enables a new playback algorithm that was introduced in Logic 10.4 for better resolution with Apple Loops. And this is only here for legacy projects created before Logic 10.4 to ensure compatibility, but by default, you want this on. I'll see you for more in the next video. Let's look a little bit more closely at working in the Loop browser. Now, I mentioned this is like a database with the search criteria on top, and we have two views. This is with category buttons. When I click here, we see these different category buttons, or we get a column type view. Let's work with this one for the moment. So the idea is that we select one of these and it'll limit the results to what I have here. And then I can click here. So for example, here I have all drums. Then in genre, I can go maybe I want urban drums only. And then for descriptors, I want maybe only grooving, ones with those tags, and maybe dry as well, and maybe relaxed as well. So now I've limited my results. Now, a couple of tips. I've mentioned that we can click on this to stop and start playback, and we can click on this to stop and start playback. We can also use the key command for preview, and by default, it's assigned to Option spacebar. So I can do that and then use the arrow keys. Just quickly move down if you want to stay mouse free, and then Option spacebar, and that'll stop it. And this is based on the key command preview, which is assigned, I believe, by default to Option and the spacebar. So here I'm going to take this and drag it in, and it's a software instrument track, and I want to use it as audio. So I'm going to drag it onto this audio track, and it'll automatically be converted to an audio loop. Now I can clear the searches with that, and then I can further refine my searches with these basic instrument tags. Now this is expandable, so I can view more of the tags at once like that by resizing. And you can also right click here to change the categories. Like maybe instead of clavinets, I want to see bass, electric basses. So I have a new category there for that, for example. Now let's say I want to restrict my search. I want to use maybe just vintage breaks. I want to get a drum groove, and I like the drum grooves in there. And for there, I can click the X there, but basically this is the only type of category that's available in this library. They're all drums, so the rest are grayed out. And then again, they're all tagged with that one genre, and then a few different descriptors that are used in this library. So with the results here, I've got a fairly big list, but we can sort the results, and I can click on name to go alphabetical or reverse alphabetical. I can sort by the number of beats. So 8 beats means it's 2 bars long, 16 means it's 4 bars long, and so on. So I can sort like that. Or, and I find this the most useful, I can sort by tempo. Now, if you were paying close attention, you will have noticed that the original tempo of this empty project was 120 BPM. And when I dragged in this loop, it switched to 100. And that's a unique feature. When the first thing you do in an empty project is drag an Apple loop in, it won't adopt the tempo of the project, but it'll conform to the tempo that the loop was created at. And that's what this tempo field is telling us, the ideal tempo for these. And we can, of course, move these orders around. I'll put tempo there so we can see it a bit bigger, and then resize so we can see the full name there. And now when I drag in subsequent loops, it'll conform to this tempo. So I find sorting by tempo useful because I want to look for loops that are around this tempo. So I can scroll, and now I can addition some. Okay, so I want to take that one. I'm going to use Option spacebar to stop it and just drag it out, and just drag and drop it there. I'm just going to copy that so I can now hear my percussion and drums together. And you'll notice with the auto leveling, they both have their gains adjusted. All right, that's working fine. So we can sort by tempo, sort by beats, and we can mark loops as favorites. I'm going to mark that one as a favorite. And we can sort by key, which isn't relevant in this particular library because there's no keys. They're all drums. Now I can click here to clear all that. And then I can, of course, go back to all loops or whatever subcategories or packs I want to go back to. So here we're seeing just a couple of my user loops, and there's the all packs. And I can go back and clear all my descriptors. So that's with the category buttons. Next video will continue with column view and more search criteria. Let's take a look at column view. In this view, we have a hierarchically separated list of categories, all favorites, genres, instruments, and moods. And they're all search criteria. And as we click on one, we'll get additional tags and metadata and categories. So let's say I'm going to look for a guitar part. And again, I can resize this here. I'm going to look for electric guitar, and I'm going to filter the list or the results even more by clicking electric over here. And you'll see the list is shortened, and we can resize this however we want. Now, I want to look at auditioning these and how it interacts with the key signature here, and the key signature based on what we have chosen here. Now, I'm going to go for one of these. Let's audition a couple. Okay, let's go with this one. Now, right now I have this set to play in song key, which by default is set to C major. So we're hearing it in C. And I'm using Option Spacebar to stop the playback. And let's say I want to have this in the key of G. And now if we audition it, we'll hear it in that key. And I'm going to switch back. Let's try going to maybe D. All right, and that's fine. And again, if I take this off and go play an original key, we're hearing it in E, the key that it was recorded at. So I'm going to go back to play in song key, and I'm going to drag this into an empty track. Let's listen. Now, if I want to repeat it, I can easily option drag it to copy it. But with Apple Loops, we have a special zone at the end of the loop in the middle. We got a loop icon where we can just drag it out and create additional iterations of it. And that works fine. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo it. And let's say I want to use only the beginning part. If I position the mouse in the lower, I got the regular trim tool. And now I can cut out the waka waka part and then just bring this on the downbeats. And maybe I want to use just this part. Or I'm going to hit undo a couple times. Maybe I want to just use this part of it, and then I'll copy that. I can position it in different places. That works great. Maybe I'll try it like that right before the bar starts. So all kinds of possibilities of creatively using these loops. Now, let's look at some other search criteria here. I'm going to go back to this view, and we can search by loop name if we know we want a specific loop or family of loops. Now, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to type in Greek Certos, and it gives me the results of a family of loops that all have this name Greek Certos in there. And again, they're playing back in the song key. Let's take that one and drag it in and hear what that sounds like. All right, that's working. However, maybe I want to audition one of these other variations of it. I don't have to drag them in one at a time. We have this little menu here, which allows us to switch between the different variations within the same family of loops. I think that works a little better, for example. So I can search like that, and I can use this X button to clear the search criteria, but then I can also recall any of the previous searches that I've done. And for example, I searched for keys before, and we can further filter or restrict the results based on key signature and time signature. So I'm going to look at 4/4. And then I'm going to go to major. I'm looking for some keys, and let's see what we have here. And these are, of course, our MIDI Apple loops. Here's another audio one. I'm going to hit Option Spacebar to stop it. I'm going to drag that in, and it'll, of course, transpose it automatically to the key I need. And that works nicely. So now you know how to use the column view or the category buttons, and you know how to search by name and then recall previous searches in the search history, or you can clear it if you want. And you can filter the results based on a variety of criteria: the key signature, time signature, the loop pack, and even the type of loop. And they can be used in any combination together to get the results down to manageable and meaningful selection for you. I'll see you for more in the next video. I want to talk a little bit about transposing and fine-tuning in this video. Now, I have this little set of loops that I created in the last couple of videos, and they work nice. One change I'm going to make on this keyboard, I'm going to turn off looping. We can do it here, or we can just drag the end. And I'm going to just cut it in the middle, and I want it to start just every second bar like that. All right, that's working great. Now, this is all playing back in the project key of D, and that works great. But let's say I want to change chords after a few bars or have it repeat in different keys. There's a couple of ways I can do it. I'm going to turn off looping here. I'm going to hit L, and I'm just going to option drag this to have a copy of it. One simple thing we can do, and I'm going to copy these over as well, is we can simply select these and use the transpose feature in the region parameters. So let's say I want to go up a tone. It'll now shift up a tone when we get to these loops, and I'm leaving the drums as they are since they're non-pitched, although they can be transposed as well. And it's often interesting to do so for creative purposes. So that works fine. Now I'm just going to bring this back, and I'm going to show you another way to do it. This is kind of my preferred way when we're working with Apple Loops. But you can also use the global tracks. I'm going to hit G to open them up, and I'm going to right click and show the transposition track. And here we can set up transpositions in this lane. Just going to resize it. And maybe over here, I want to have it go up 2 semitones. So that works fine. My personal preference is to use the transpose function in the region parameters. It gives a little bit more nuanced control in case we don't want to transpose everything the same amount. Now I'm going to hit G to close up the global tracks, and let's look at an interesting use of the fine-tune region parameter as well as the delay parameter. Now I'm going to hit O to open my loop browser, and I've already filtered here guitars and electric guitar, and I have one that I like. We can see it's 2 bars long in the key of B at 120 beats per minute. I'm going to hit Option Spacebar to stop it. I'm going to just drag it in here, and it should sound fine. Let's listen. I'm going to mute the keyboards just so we can focus on this. All right, that's working great. Now I'm going to just take these both and option drag down to create a double track of it. So it's just going to sound louder right now. But what I'm going to do is hard pan them, and I'm going to select the fine-tune parameter to get a detuning so we can get a kind of stereo chorusing kind of effect. So here it is again. It'll just be louder now. And I'm going to offset the fine-tuning. It's a fantastic way to get a nice stereoizing effect, and we can add to it in the more field here with delay. I'm going to put a little bit of delay as well. I can add more for a more dramatic delay. We really hear the slapping there. But I'm going to option click to snap that back, and maybe I'll delay these ones. I'll try the opposite direction. And I can fine tune these a bit also, and I'll do it in the opposite direction here. That sounds great. So fine-tuning in conjunction with delay for a stereo chorusing effect. Now this needs a bit of reverb. I can easily set that up in the mixer here. I'm going to set up a send on both of these. Dial some up. And we'll just call up a Chromaverb reverb here. And we just go for one of the factory presets. Go into here, and we'll go to Dirty Chamber. I'll see you for more in the next video. We know that Apple Loops will play back at any tempo, but what about the feel of the Apple Loops? How can we get the feel to conform to other regions or other regions to conform to the Apple Loops? I'm going to start by playing this little example with a straight off-the-shelf Apple Loop. I haven't done anything to it, just 4 instances of it here, with an unquantized bass part, and you'll hear that they don't really lock in tightly together. And you can see the timing of the MIDI is pretty rough. I played it in unquantized. So one thing I can do is simply quantize the MIDI, and that'll probably solve it to a large degree. I'll put it to 16B, and you can see the values change. That's okay. It's not bad, but we can get it more in sync with the drum feel. There's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm going to put this back to off. Now, one is using what's called the groove track. I'm going to right click on the track header, and I'm going to go configure track header. And you can also use Option T and enable the groove track function, which by default isn't on. And now I can click in this field here and assign one track to be the groove track, and then assign other tracks optionally to follow it. So again, let me just refresh your memory now what these sound like out of sync with each other. All right, so I'm going to assign this to the groove track. And now here I can enable this checkbox to have it follow. And you see that the notes jumped a bit. Let me just go back to the event list here, and I'll put this on, and I'll just refresh the screen set. And you can see here they've jumped to new positions based on the transient markers contained in this Apple loop. And that works perfectly. Problem solved. Now here's another scenario. Here's a different groove, and I'm going to play it for you as is with the click so you can hear it. So it's in time, but it's got a nice, rough, loose, authentic kind of feel to it. Now, let's say I want to have the bass follow it. Well, I can do the same as last time with the groove tracks, and that'll work fine. I'll just do it real quick, and it should work perfectly. All right, that works nicely. It moves some of the notes around, but it works. But let's look at another thing that we can do. Let's say I want to take this bass, and I'm going to quantize it. It's just MIDI, so it's going to be fine. And I'm going to give it like an extreme swing value just to highlight how this works. That kind of real tight swing kind of feel on the 16ths. So with this quantized, I can now have this follow the MIDI. And to illustrate what's going on here, let me put flex on, and we'll see here that we're in slicing mode. And when I enable this, you'll see the markers shift. So it's going to now follow the groove track, which is in fact quantized. And that works fine. Now, when we have flex enabled on an Apple loop region, we get the quantize field active. So we can quantize it just like we can MIDI. Let me turn these off. So we're not using groove tracks now. We're back to our regular unquantized version of both in a moment. So rough. But let's say I want to quantize them both to maybe 16B, give a nice natural loose kind of feel. That'll work fine without using any of the groove track functions. Now, of course, we can zoom in and get into flex markers and creating and moving, but we don't really need to. If we look in the editor, we're going to see that transient markers are already present, and that's part of what makes an Apple loop, having that kind of metadata. We can go detect transients if we need to recalculate them. And in the track editor, we have this function here for analyze audio for flex editing if necessary as well. And we can turn flex on here and see the markers. And if you need to, you shouldn't need to, you can play with the strength of the transient detection to detect less markers if you want. And as I do that, you'll see some of this changing and it'll get a bit rougher. It'll probably still sound okay, but it won't be as accurate. And Apple loops generally default to having the maximum strength for transient marker detection. Finally, here's one last example where I've dragged in a guitar Apple loop and I have all of them playing together, and I'm simply using the groove track with this as the groove track and everything else following it, and it works fine. And you'll see it show up here in the quantized field. I'll see you for more in the next video. I've got a project here with some live drums, live guitar. It's at 118 beats per minute. It sounds good. Here's a section of it that I want to harvest for some Apple loops. All right, I have multi-track drums here with take folders and lots of different tracks, and they all have different processing with all kinds of third-party plugins and whatnot. And I want to just save some drum loops from here. So it loops nicely. First thing I want to do is just render this all down. I'm going to close this up and I'm going to bounce down the entire drum track because I might want to harvest some other regions from here. And this starts at bar 3. So I'm just going to solo this and bounce the entire track using the bounce dialog box. I'm going to leave it at 16-bit and let's just do this and I'll name it and I'll speed it up for you. All right, so I'm just going to create a new audio track, and I'm just going to import it into here. And there it is. Let me just bypass my processing on the main output. So it was bars 32 to 36 that I wanted to grab. All right, great. So I'm just going to use my command to split at the locators. And now there's a couple of things we can do. I can choose File, and then I can go Export Region to Loop Library, or I can use the shortcut Shift, Command, and O. Or I can right-click and get to that same export menu function from there. Or I can just drag and drop it onto the loop browser. But I'm going to use this for now. And it brings up this dialog box. So here we name the loop first. And if we're dragging in multiple loops at the same time to the loop browser, which we can do, and we want them all to be part of the same family, they'll all adopt the name of the regions. But for now, let's just do this one. Now, in this case, I want looping where it'll conform to the project tempo, scale, and key, although in this case, scale and key aren't going to be relevant. And it's important that when we're creating looping regions like this, they have to conform to bars and beats. So it's important it starts on a beat and bar line and ends on an even bar and beat. And we can use one shot if we wanted to ignore project tempo, scale, and key and that kind of information. It's good if you just want a single hit to play back at a specific tempo, a chord stab or something like that. So here we set all the various tags. This, again, isn't really relevant for now. For here, I'll just choose a couple that I think are appropriate. And then I'm going to hit create. So now it's bouncing that region down and it's adding it to the loop browser. Now the loops are automatically added to the browser and to the loop index and saved in the user loops in the user library. So I'm going to hit O. And if I filter my packs here and go to my loops, we'll see that there it is. And it's got the correct number of beats, the tempo, and the key again, although that's not particularly relevant. And I can always get to it by going to my all packs and searching. So let's say I type in there, it's going to return it to me there. And I can also, of course, just dig in and burrow through here and get to it that way. Now, let's say I like this groove and I want to harvest some more variations of these. I'm going to take some more of them. Let me just make some cuts here and I'll be right back. All right, I've got 3 4-bar variations and a 2-bar variation that I want to save. So I'm just going to name these. And they're all given the same name by default, but they'll be numbered sequentially when I drag them into here. So we saw that little plus sign. And here, I'm going to just leave the name like that. And again, we'll just put the tags that we want. I'm going to put kits this time also. And let's let it process them. And there we are. So if I look in my loops over here, we'll see my original groove that I exported. There's the 2-bar variation. And then the 3 4-bar variations, all numbered sequentially. Here I've got some organ and bass programmed up. And set 112 BPM. Slower than what I just exported, but let's bring it in and hear how well the Apple Loops transient detection and stretching works. Great, and maybe I want to try some of the variations that I might like better. And just for fun, let's try slowing it down a little bit more. It's captured the original sloppiness of the original drumming, but maintains the original feel and transients, warts and all, pretty accurately. Now, let's say I want to add a third-party library to my loop browser. For example, here's some Apple Loops AAM Ask Green Riser loop pack that I downloaded from somewhere, some risers. And I want to take this whole folder and just drag and drop it in and see what logic is prompting me here. And because these loops are stored on an external hard drive, it's asking me if I want to copy these to my user loops folder or if I want to use the current location. I'm going to choose to copy them. And if I look in the loop hacks now, we'll see that it's been added there. Now, if you're not seeing them right away, you may need to reindex your Apple Loops, and you can always do that from the menu on top here. When we go reindex all Apple Loops, it'll take a while. I'm not going to make you sit through it all, but it'll take a few minutes depending on the size of your library. And then when it's done, everything will be updated. And looking in the Finder, we'll see that in my user folder, library, audio, Apple Loops, user loops, I now have this loop pack that I imported, plus in the single files, the drum loops that I exported. And if we look in the global library, audio, Apple Loops, Apple, we have all the factory Apple Loops, but underneath we have the Apple Loops index. And these are where the index files are stored. And if you're ever doing some troubleshooting and need to trash your Apple Loops index, this is where the files are, so you can delete these and rebuild it from scratch. I'll see you for more in the next video. All right, I've taken my custom drum loops, turned on flex and quantized to 16B, and it sounds a lot tighter internally. And I want to look at creating software instrument Apple Loops in this video. So here's where I'm at. I've got this nice bass part, and it's using a third-party instrument, Trillion from Spectrasonics. And I want to save this as a software instrument, and I'm deliberately choosing a third-party instrument because it's easy to do with internal ones. I just want to show you that it can and does work with third-party instruments. So the process is basically the same thing. I'm going to take this first 8 bars, which is built around a B-flat minor 7 chord, and just drag it to the loop browser, and I get the plus sign. And I'm prompted with my usual tags, and let me just enter them. And I'm going to set the scale to minor, and I'm going to set the genre to funk, and the tempo's already set. Key is B-flat. I'll put this at bass, electric bass, and I'll use the tags electric and grooving. So let's click OK or create, and there it's bouncing. And you'll notice there's a little loop kind of shading that happens as it's bouncing. That's fine. So that's good. And I'm going to take this E-flat 7 one, and I'm going to do the same thing there and drag it. I want to get both chords. And this is E-flat 7, looping, minor, B-flat, bass, same tags, electric, grooving, create, and it's rendering. So now we can see them here in the My Loops, and I'm just going to go to all packs, and I'll go to bass, and let's make sure that everything got entered properly. Electric bass and B-flat. There it is. So let me drag it in to an empty space over here, and it's going to call up the software instrument track, and it calls up Trillion with the same patch. So let's just mute this one and listen. So that works great, and I can always jump back here and just quickly get to my E-flat 7 loop. Now, the thing is, I have my song key set to B-flat minor here, so we need to be careful. when you're saving pitched material like this. Now, let's say I'm going to mute this for a moment. I change the song key to maybe C minor and drag this in again from scratch on a new track. It's going to play back in the key of C minor at this point, while the rest won't. So it doesn't quite match, whereas this one does. So that's actually a feature, not a bug, that it works with the key. When you're working with Apple Loops, it'll easily transpose it for you. Now, let's look at what happens. I'm just going to delete this, or I'll leave it in there and mute it. And I'm going to delete this one. And let's look at what happens when we work with track stacks. Now, I'm going to unhide one that I have here. And I've created a track stack with, again, some third-party instruments. I have a Falcon instrument, DS Thorn, and Hybrid 64. And I've programmed up a little part, and this is what it sounds like. The Apple Loops that I create will even recall modified settings on third-party instruments. Let's say on this Falcon instrument, and it doesn't matter if you don't have this, it's just for the idea of it. I'm going to modify the preset. Just loop this. Okay, so I've modified these settings from the original. Now I'm going to save this as an Apple loop. Let me save this to B flat minor, bass, and this time I'm going to go synthetic, and we'll just leave it with that. And let's go create, and there it's done. So let me hide this, or mute it rather. Let's put this back to B flat minor. And here's the new bass stack. I'm going to drag it in, and let's listen. And if we look at Falcon, we'll see that the modified settings have been accurately saved and recalled. So just to recap, when you're creating Apple Loops from MIDI regions, the Apple Loops will save and recall the note data as well as the instruments, even if they're third-party instruments, and even if they're modified, and even if they're in a track stack. I'll see you for more in the next video. I've had some fun putting some drum grooves together using the step sequencer. Now I've got Ultra Beat called up here, just a factory preset, and I've got Fat Effects with a little bit of filter and some LFO modulation, just a little bit mixed in. A nice slow modulation dialed in like that. Now I've got some note repeat happening here, and I'm doing this for a reason, to show you that it gets transferred to Apple Loops when we get the Apple Loops happening. Now I copied this over here, and I've got the same groove, but with some variations. And here I'm using note repeats again, an additional note, and I'm also using some different looping going on here. So one of the things I find really fun about working with the step sequencer is it's easy to just copy and create variations. Like, for example, this one I'm going to call variation 03. And let's copy our underlying grooves here just to get a bit of inspiration. And I can modify it. I'm going to loop this one differently. Actually, maybe not that. It throws it off too much. Go to velocity. Another one in there. There, it's nice and busy now. All right, so that's sounding nice. Now, let's say I want to save these drum grooves for reuse. I could just simply go into the step sequencer, go here and save them as patterns under here. And I've done that actually with the first couple of them. You can see them over here. I'll pull this out and you can see the names Fuller 1 and 2. And that works fine. And then I can just call them up from here on whatever instrument I'm using. However, We can also save them as Apple loops. And the advantage of that is we're going to save them with the processing and the instrument called up. So let me just close the editor for here. I'm going to take all three of these and just drag them in together. And you see the plus sign with the 3. And then I'm going to set them as looping. For scale, I'm going to set neither. Genre, I'll write hip hop and R&B. For key, I'm going to write none. It's got the tempo. All drums, beats, I'll write electric, grooving, and let's create them. All right, so there they are, the three of them. Now, what I can do, of course, is just call them up on another track. I'll call up, let's say, the third variation on an empty track over here. And it's going to call up the instrument and the effects processing. It should sound the exact same. So that's great. And you'll hear that it's playing the variations in terms of the looping. So if we look at loop, we'll see that it's got the settings there and it's following them. And same thing with the note repeat. It's doing those little skips. So what's great about this is we're calling up the instrument and the effects, but also we have access to this as an Apple loop. So I can quickly audition these in my browser without having to load in the instruments and or the effects. So I can just go through here. We hear everything in there. And let's say I decide I like it and I just want to use it as is in another project. I can simply drag it to an audio track and boom, it's there, all processed, all ready to go. And I don't need to call up the kit or the effects. Now, if I decide, okay, I like it, I'm auditioning them there. I like it, but I want to try it without the fat effects. Well, simple. I just drag it to an instrument track and then bypass the fat effects on it. Or if I say I like it, but I want to maybe try some different drum kits, again, just drag it and then just change the instrument here or the Ultrabeat kit. And you can use third-party instruments as well. So lots of versatility using the pattern loops here. And let's not forget that they also contain the options for automation. So you can actually control and store automation patterns here if you want and factor that into what you're saving and recalling with your Apple loops. I'll see you for more in the next video. Now, there are a couple of advantages of working with drummer loops. Now, we all know that when we call up a drummer track, it takes a few seconds for all the samples to load. They're a big sample set, and then the editor opens. We've got to select the patterns we want in Audition. And that's fine, but we can easily use the Apple loops here. I'm going to filter and just so the drummer loops to quickly audition simply by clicking like that. We don't have to wait for anything to load. And it's instantaneous. Now, if I find one that I decide I like for example, that I can drag it to an empty space and it'll call up a drummer track. And there, see, it took that second or two. And aside from a bit of a volume difference, we have the same groove loaded in there. Now, the other advantage is, of course, we can just drag this to an audio track and we'll get it rendered as an audio file. All with the exact same processing. I'll just mute this and solo this one. And there we get it with that bit of extra volume that it's been processed with. And there are also advantages to creating your own drummer loops. Now, for example, here I've got this pattern that I put together in the last video, and I'm using a different Ultrabeat kit on it. So same groove, just a different kit. And I called up the new tracks dialog box and called up a new drummer, chose percussion, and by default, it called up an Isabella Latin kit. And then I modified it. So I've muted some of the instruments. I want just conga and shaker. And I went into the details and I modified some of the ranges. And I changed some of the processing. I added in a bit of the delay here. Kind of interesting with the delay. And I added in some compression and so on. So it's all set up now with the variations that I like. So now what I can do is save this, and then I'll have the same opportunity to recall it with my customized settings, either as an audio file, or I can call it up on a drummer track. So let me rename it. And then I'm going to simply drag it into the loop browser. There's my plus sign. And again, I give it the attributes that I want. I'm going to set the scale to neither. As far as genre, I think I'll choose world since it's the closest that I can get to. None, got the tempo there. I'm going to choose percussion instead of all drums, and it's mainly conga. I'll classify it as that. And I'll go relaxed, acoustic, grooving, and go create. And here we're getting an interesting message. I'm glad this warning came up so I can explain you what's going on. Now, the thing with the drummer tracks is there's a humanize. I can't get into it now because of this dialog box, but under the details tab here, there's a humanize function which will randomize the timings. So it's possible, like in this example, where some events are falling before beat 1. The first hit might be a couple of ticks before. So I have the option here to change it so that those earlier ticks or events will be moved up to 1111, or I can move all the contents back so that that first event falls on 1111. In this case, I'm going to change the upbeat events, and that'll do the job nicely. So now we're going to see it in the loop browser, and I'll use the search field and type in Latin. We'll use the search function this time. And there it is. There's my variation. I can recall it easily. I can audition it from there, of course. But let me try dragging it now to a MIDI track. Let's go to this one. I'll put it in over here. So now what it's done is it's converted it to MIDI for me. I'm just going to close the piano roll. Here it is. It's called up the sampler instrument with all the processing in place that I want. And it should sound the exact same right now. And we can work with it that way. And when we're in this kind of mode, I have the arrow here so that if I did have variations on it, we'll be able to call it up from this family of loops. In fact, let's do that just so I can show you how it works. We haven't done that yet in this series where we've created variations within the same family. So I'm just going to solo this out, and let's solo this and modify it and create another variation. I'm going to add the cowbell in. All right, so let's say I want to save that as my second variation. I'm going to just rename it. I can do it here or directly in the tracks area, but let's rename it like that. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to open the loop browser and just drag it here. And let's quickly set up our tags. And there it is. So if I look in my field over here, I'll now see the two variations. I can switch between them that way. So there are a few takeaways from this video. One, we can use the loop browser to easily audition existing drummer loops without having to first load them in. Two, we can save our own variations here, and that'll include variations within the drummer settings and the processing. Three, we can drag them out to either audio tracks, drummer tracks, or empty spaces, which will create drummer tracks, or onto software instrument tracks where it'll call up the instrument and instantiate it as MIDI rather than drummer patterns. And the fourth thing is, if we name our patterns with a number at the very end and we have a couple of sequential numbers, we'll get them grouped together like this and available from the drop-down menu within the tracks area. See you for more in the next video. Now, so far we've been working with Apple loops, but you can also add loops and loop collections that are not Apple loops or formatted as Apple loops. You can add them to the loop browser as untagged loops. Now, the idea with untagged loops is that you can preview them at either their original tempo or the project tempo. So when you bring them in, there's a batch analysis for tempo information. It can remove existing information, and they can play back at project tempo. Now, because untagged loops don't contain all the embedded metadata associated with Apple loops, they don't offer all the same features like transposition and so on. So there's a few different ways of doing this. First thing we can do is drag a loop or a folder containing loops into the loop browser. And we're going to see a dialog box appear when we do that. Now I'm going to switch here where I've got some loops that I've recorded. And I'm just going to grab a bunch of them, maybe these 5 variations. And I'm going to drag them over here. And I'm getting prompted, if I switch back to Logic now, with this message asking me if I want to add them to the untagged loops. I'm going to go add, And now I have a new tab that's appeared here with this new folder called user loops. And I can, of course, double click and go in and see them. And then I can go back to the root level of my untagged loops folder and see what's there. So what's happened when I did this is that a new folder named Untagged Loops was created in the Audio Music Apps subfolder of the music folder. So if I switch back to the Finder here, and I've got this set up, you'll see it. So here I am, my user folder, music, Audio Music Apps, and here's this new Untagged Loops folder that's created with this user loops that we see here, and then the loops that are brought in. Now, if I click into here and select one, it's going to preview at the project tempo. So I'm going to click add, and then I've added it in over here to an audio track. You hear it with the click, and I can change the tempo and it'll follow. So that's one way of adding untagged loops to the loop library. Now, another way we can go about this is using the All Files browser. So I'm going to switch here, and I've already navigated to this folder that contains a bunch of my loops. And here, I'm going to take, for example, this whole folder where I've got a whole family of loops in there. I'm going to just go back, and I can right-click on the whole folder and go Add to Untagged Loops. So here it's telling me it's going to add it to the Untagged Loops library, and there's going to be a constant tempo with a downbeat that ends on a beat and so on. It's going to basically analyze the loops for transients and create tempo information. So now let's go back to our loop browser, and I'll go back and we'll see we have this new folder that's been added, and I can click into here. And I can add by right-clicking or by dragging or using this add button. Let's just bring that over, line it up to bar line. All following the tempo information as expected. And if we look in the Finder now, we'll see that it's created an alias of this. So it's left the loops in the original location. They happen to be on another hard drive, but created an alias here, which is great for managing large loop libraries that you have on external media. Now, another thing that we can do is in the Finder, just copy a loop or a folder that contains the loops into this music library, Audio Music Apps Untagged Loops folder. So here I'm in the Untagged Loops folder, and here I've got some external files on another drive. And here I'm going to copy in this folder over here just by dragging it into the Untagged Loops. And there it's copied. And if I look over here, we'll see we now have another folder of untagged loops here. And this time it's not an alias because I copied it in the Finder. So if we switch back here and just refresh this, we should see it there now as well. Now, don't worry if you're not seeing this Untagged Loops tab in your loop browser. The Untagged Loops tab appears in the loop browser only after you add at least one loop or loop folder containing untagged loops. And you can't manually create a folder and name it Untagged Loops. It won't appear in the loop browser. You've got to add them one of the three ways that I showed you, either dragging a loop or a folder into the loop browser, or using the All Files browser and right-clicking, or in the Finder, copying a loop or a folder into an already existing Untagged Loops folder. See you for more in the next video. I want to look at some interesting ways of using the region parameters in the inspector, particularly under the More category, to get some interesting kind of sound design type of effects from Apple Loops. Now here I've dragged in this pop rock guitar part, which has a default tempo that it was created at 80 beats per minute and in the key of B. And here I'm in the key of C, which is a default, and it's playing a bit faster. And first thing I want to point out, and this is common with all Apple Loops, there's a follow tempo checkbox that's enabled by default, and that allows it to follow the tempo of the project. Now with this off, it's going to play back at the source tempo that it was recorded at, and it'll be off with the click in this case, given that that's at 104 BPM. with that on, it'll play back with the click. Now, what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit, and I want to take a little piece of this. All right, let's take this little bit over here, and I'm just going to option drag it down to another track. So I have just that little piece, and I'm going to zoom out. Now, what we can do is play back Apple loops at multiples of the tempo. We can play them back twice as fast, 4 times as fast, or 8 times as fast, or half, quarter, or 8 times as slow. I'm going to go really slow with this. So, of course, it stretches it out. And I'm just going to hit stop to move the playhead back here and then snap it with the key command, the semicolon. And just to show you what command that is, here it is, semicolon for move region or event to playhead position. It's the old pickup clock command. So now this will sound kind of interesting with the regular guitar riff on top and this long, drawn out kind of drone underneath. It's kind of interesting, you know, for a sound design kind of effect, but we can also reverse it, which obviously gives it an entirely different context. So let's, just for fun, try panning these a bit and listen to the two of them together. And I just looped it underneath. And that works, of course, very interestingly. Now, another thing we can do is we can fade in or out on Apple loops, but we can also create tape effects for speeding up and slowing down. So, for example, I'm going to draw a long fade over here. And then in the region parameters, we can switch this from being a traditional fade out to being a slowdown effect. So let's listen to that. So really a lot of interesting sound design possibilities. And of course, we can ramp up with the fade in and have that be a speed up effect if you want to get that kind of tape stop effect. I'm going to undo that, both of them, and just wanted to draw your attention to that. And that's, again, just with a little chunk of this. Now let's look at another interesting use of the region parameters. I want to look for some drums, and I usually sort by tempo so that I can get all the grooves around the tempo I'm looking for, 104, all in the same place. And of course, I can go through an audition like that. But I have some favorites marked that I like. So I'm going to sort by favorites by clicking on that icon, and then they'll be either at the top or the bottom of the list, depending if we're in reverse or forward favorite order. So all we need to do is check or uncheck this box to add something to the favorites. And this is the one I want. So let me just drag this in and listen to it. All right, so that's working nicely. Now, what I want to do is create a reverse snare effect leading up to this snare drum. Let me just hide the loop browser for a moment. And it's not as difficult as you think. So here's the snare. I'm just going to grab that, zoom back, and I'm going to option drag it down to the track below. So right now, we're just going to have the snare twice as loud. And on this track, I've already lowered the volume, but I'll bring it up. So it's just louder. So what I'm going to do is start by playing it at half the speed and then reversing it. And then I'm just going to eyeball it and line it up. It doesn't have to be exact so that the end of it falls right around where the actual snare attack happens. So something like that should sound pretty interesting for a reverse snare swell leading up to the actual snare hit. And I'm going to lower it in volume just so it's a little more subtle. And then I want to repeat it again on this next downbeat over here, or not downbeat, but beat 2. I'm just going to option drag it and bring it over. And again, you can zoom in and get really fine if you want. So that's a fun and easy reverse snare. And again, that's half speed. I can change that, and I can play with the tape stop effect if I want to have it perhaps ramp up or ramp out of the effect. So let's combine that with speed up. So this had it and that one didn't. Let's try this one with the tape out effect and see what that's like. Here I've got a kick drum hit selected, and I'm going to option drag this down to a new track. And here I'm going to just go to the beginning, clear the marquee selection, take this and use the same key command to bring this to the top. All right, now for this to work, I'm not going to reverse it, but we need to zero in and really get the transients clipped right at the beginning there like that. I want it right at the beginning. I don't even mind missing a bit of the initial attack. And now let me just redo the key command. I'm going to zero it so that I'm at 4111, and then use the same key command to snap it right to the beginning. So I'll zoom out, and again, right now it's just going to be louder. Kind of interesting just with that extra weight, but let's start by slowing it down like that. And we can even go to maybe 4 times as slow. So it's really interesting to add weight and length and sustain. Bit of a fade there, and let's put it right at the downbeat of 5 as well. I'm just going to option drag this over like that. Now, what about selecting both of these and transposing them? Let's go down an octave and see what that's like. Interesting effect, maybe not quite as much. Finally, I've copied the whole drum loop down to another track, and I've offset it. If I click hold here, you'll see it's starting on 413, so it's starting an 8th note later, and I'm transposing it, in this case, up an octave. And I've put a noise gate on here. That's without the gate. And with it. And I've added a bit of reverb to our reverse snares and set the balances. And with this, adds an interesting percussive element. We can raise it up 2 octaves for a different set of kind of aliasing and percussive artifacts that are interesting. Even 3 octaves. With or without the gate. And of course we can go lower as well. Very interesting. And with the guitars. So there's some interesting ideas on what you can do using the region parameters with Apple Loops. We'll see you for more in the next video. Let's look at working with the vocal Apple Loops. Now, I've sorted by name, and I've come up with this Emery category that I like. There's a bunch of improvs.
Hey, yeah. Na, 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 na.
And I put together a little simple piece in the same source key. I didn't want it transposed too much because the voice won't sound natural, and close to the source tempo. I'm at 108. And I've put some simple bass and piano down with one of the Apple Loop drum beats. And here's what I've got. And we're going to look at how we can use some of the region parameters to flesh out the vocal Apple Loops.
Hey, hey. All right. Hey,
Added a bit of reverb.
all right now.
Little interlude leading to another section.
Hey, yeah. Don't, 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 don't. Hey, yeah. Do, 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 do.
Interlude again. Into the next section.
Na, 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 na. Oh. Na, 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 na. Ooh.
So I've just strung together some ideas here. Now, first thing I did was I dragged in this improvisation O2
Oh, 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 oh.
and just put it underneath. And let's hear what that sounds like.
Oh, oh, hey, hey. All right. Oh, oh, hey, oh, oh.
All right, so what I'm going to do is cut out this whole last part It's a little bit in the way with the lead vocal, but I'm going to kind of use these to build up a little arrangement, just showing you don't have to use all of these Apple loops. All right, that works nicely. Now, let's say I want to create some harmony. I'm going to option drag this down to the track below, and we can use the transpose features. And since this is fairly diatonic, I'm going to try going down by a minor third, and it should be more or less in the ballpark. All right, so it's a little busy with all the doubling and that backup line. I think what I'm going to do is just use this middle part over here and this end part. So I'm just marquee clicking to delete the parts I don't want. All right, so that's working nicely, and we'll keep going. So let's try the same thing just to start with. I'm going to transpose it down a minor third. All right, I'm not liking it doubling those or harmonizing those do, do, do parts. So let's get rid of that. I missed one of them. There we go. All right, that works nicely there. So again, selectively putting the harmonies in and out will add some variety. I got the same little interlude here. So let's see if this works again with the same transpose value. We could go up, but I'm trying down for now. All right, that does work. Let's try, just for fun, bringing this one up. I don't know if it's going to work, but just for some variety. Yeah, that worked nicely. Let's try bringing this one up too and see. I'm bringing it up a major third rather than down a minor third, just to stay diatonic. I don't like that one as much. Maybe I'll just mute that one. We'll leave that one with the solo voice, and let's bring this last one up as well and see if that works. All right, so there we've built a little arrangement using some simple doubling techniques, and I could bring in some more backups and copy and paste them, and that could work. But just to give you a little idea of some of the things that are possible with these Apple loops. So let's just listen through, and then we'll sign out. See you for more in the next video. What happens if you find an Apple loop you like, but you don't like, let's say, the kick drum sound? You want to replace just that. I'm going to show you a nice little workflow using a couple of key commands that make that kind of drum replacement easy. Here's an Apple loop straight from the library. And let's say I want to replace the kick, and I want to use the kick from this, which is a very different drum loop. So let's look at how we're going to do this. First thing is I'm just going to isolate this kick. I know the first hit is the kick. I'll just do that, get rid of that. And now I have just that kick drum. That's fine. That's what I'm going to use. Now, to start with, let me just close the loop browser up. I'm going to go to the key command window, and there's an unassigned key command. By default, it's unassigned, called slice a transient marker. So when you see this asterisk, it means it's unassigned. And I've learned my F1 key, and you just do that by pressing that. I'll hit delete. So you just press that and then press the key you want to assign to it. In my case, F1. So with that done, I'm going to select this and just hit F1. And boom, that's split up at all the transients. And this is way better than option clicking with the scissor tool, because you don't necessarily want it split at exact 16th notes or whatever interval of time. You want it split based on the transients within the actual audio file. So now I'm just going to make a couple of copies of this. So I always have an additional copy to grab. And what I'm going to do is just zoom so I can see everything there. Select this one, and I'm going to use the key command Control Home, which is go to the beginning of the selection, or go to selection start. And I'm going to hit delete and select this one and use the key command for pickup clock, the semicolon that we used in the last video. And boom, that's there. All right, now here's the next one. So again, Control Home, delete, semicolon. Let's keep going, and I'm just going to keep making some copies of these. Okay, there's the next one. Control Home, delete, semicolon. Okay, there we go. Control Home, delete, semicolon. And let me just put these out of the way here so I'm not going to interfere with the loop. Okay, another one here. Control Home, delete, semicolon. Okay, and then we have two of them there. Control Home, delete, semicolon. Control Home, delete, semicolon. And I think that's the whole loop. So now we should be able to hear this all with that kick drum replaced. And that's based on transients, not arbitrary 16th note divisions. So it'll preserve the feel of your groove. And you can use this same workflow for drum layering as well as drum replacement. For drum layering, it's the same thing, just don't delete the original slices. And I chose very disparate sounding loops in this example just to show you how elegantly this does work. I'll see you for more in the next video. When we start using Apple loops with Quick Sampler and Drum Machine Designer, there's a whole new world of possibilities that open up. Now, let's start by looking at Quick Sampler. Here's a loop that I like. And my project's at 116. And I'm going to drag it into the track header on an instrument track. And I'm going to go create Quick Sampler Optimized. And it's automatically going to map it out. And here it is. I can play it on my keyboard now, triggering each slice. And if you want to learn more about Quick Sampler in particular, check out the Logic 10.5 and 10.6 Update Explain series. There's a lot of detail on it. But for now, we've got this sliced here, and we can adjust the sensitivity of the slices. We can have it chopped based on transient, which is what I want, or based on these other criteria, and map it chromatically, and so on. Now, what I want to get to first is under this action menu, we have copy MIDI pattern. So let me just close this up for a moment. And here in the tracks area on this track, I'm just going to hit Command V to paste it in. We don't have the optimized volume this way, so I got to lower the volume here, and that's fine. So if we look in the piano roll editor, we'll see that we have each hit sliced up based on transients. So let me just copy this, make a kind of safety version. And one simple, fun, intuitive thing we can do to get some interesting variations is just change the order of the slices around. And we can drag them, copy them, move them, do all kinds of things. I'm going to copy that down there and drag it there. Let's listen to that. Interesting variation. I don't like that one. So you can see how it's easy to create some fun variations just by kind of randomly doing this kind of reordering. So you can use these for a fill. So that's great right there. Maybe I can chop it and just use one bar, or I can hold down Option and drag to time compress it, or maybe just use a couple of beats of it, or maybe just modify one or two notes just to get a very simple variation. Let's try that. I'll just delete that and make a new copy to work from. And here's a simple variation. I copied and moved some notes and changed some velocities. So that's great. Now, another thing we can do is actually go into Quick Sampler itself and use some of the features here. For example, the filtering. Maybe I can modulate that. We'll assign this to LFO1. And then we can dial this up. We'll sync it to tempo. Make it unipolar. Turn the key trigger off. So you can get some fun effects like that. Now, another thing we can do is create a drum machine designer track from this. Now, if I do it like this filter modulation is going to get set to each instrument. So I'm just going to zero this, turn this off. And we'll start with that. So the filtering will be in place and we can adjust it if we want to. So let's go create drum machine designer track. And there it's created a new track at the bottom. And there's the region. Let's just loop it. And each slice is mapped out to its own instrument. We have pad controls where I can adjust parameters for each individual slice. I can audition them. Let's take this one and dial up a bunch of reverb and hear what that sounds like. I'll bring the volume down. There it is. So we can affect them that way, and I can get into sampler detail for each individual slice if I want to adjust, for example, the filter and turn it on, maybe on this one. And put the modulation up. And so on. And then there's the main slicing that's taking place where we can see each slice here. So there's a lot you can do. Again, check out the Logic Pro 10.5 and 10.6 explained for more on this as well as with Quick Sampler. Here I've brought a bass loop in with my modified MIDI region. And let's drag this into Quick Sampler and make this pitched instrument an instrument as well. And again, we have all the slices now mapped out. And I'm going to start by copying this MIDI pattern again. And let's just name these so we don't get confused. And then I'll position this at the beginning here on bass instrument and paste it in. And I'll just mute this original one. So it should sound the exact same right now. And I can get into modifying it in all kinds of ways. I can use some filter, cutoff, modulation. I can adjust the pitch. Maybe amp envelope. Maybe I want to make each note shorter. I can set this to be a simple two-stage envelope. So you can play with things like that, with slower tech. And of course, I can always go into the region like I did with the drums and actually change the notes. Here I've modified some of the notes and the lengths and the velocities. You can see the loops being repeated. So those are just a few ideas of what you can do with Apple Loops and Quick Sampler. We'll continue with more in the next video. Let's look at two different ways of transposing individual notes within an Apple loop. Now, here's a simple guitar phrase, and it's in the key of D. And you'll notice this is in the key of C, but since it's the first thing I drag in, if I bring it to an audio track, this will be switched to D, and it's going to play back in its original key of D. Now, the easiest way to do it is to simply use flex pitch. I'm going to turn on flex and then I'll turn on flex pitch. It'll be analyzed and I can go into my editor, make sure flex pitch is on. So we can simply transpose individual slices like that. Let's bring this little slide up. And maybe I'll make one more transposition. I'll bring this up. So that works fine. I'm going to turn off the flex, or at least hide it. And if I switch this to, let's say, C, it'll transpose this. All right, so that's working fine. Now, the other way, I can take this. Again, we're playing in the key of D here now. And I'm going to drag this over a track header, and I'm going to create Drum Machine Designer track with it. So now we've got each slice mapped out, but it doesn't transpose it, and it's going to play back in the key of C. So let me just hide this for a moment, and I'm going to solo or cycle, rather, this region. Here, we're in the key of C, and this is set to play back in the song key. That's the key of C. But here it's playing back in D, a tone higher. So important to be aware when you're using this method of using Drum Machine Designer to transpose pitched slices, that it's going to bring it in the key of the actual loop and not the song key. So with that done, let's bring this back and we can select the individual slices. And as long as we're on sample detail, we can transpose them. Transpose that one. So those are two different ways. Now, this will work with drums really nicely since pitch isn't an issue. We can transpose the pitch of individual slices. Here I've got a drum loop. And I'll just take that and drag it to another empty track header. And I'm going to create Drum Machine Designer track with it, where again, it'll map it all out and create a track stack for us with all the individual slices mapped to their own channel strips. And again, here I can now transpose individual slices. So here, let's take this one. Maybe I want to transpose that down. And transpose that one down as well, lower. And then maybe just to drive the point home, I'll take that first kick drum hit and transpose that down as well. I'll see you for more in the next video. Now, there's several ways to use Apple Loops with Logic's sampler. Now, sampler is very deep and there's a lot of things we can do. I'm just going to sort of scratch the surface and give you a few ideas to think about. Now, here's a loop. So I'm going to start by dragging it to a track header. I can use an existing one or an empty space. I'm going to go sampler zone per note. And it's going to map it out by default across the keyboard, and I can trigger it. And I'm going to adjust the volume here because we don't have that compensation when we're working in this mode where we get the gain offset since we're not dealing with an audio region. And I can transpose it down. Or higher. So we're getting a kind of classic sampler mode where the speed changes along with the pitch, but we can easily get around that by turning on the flex that's internal to sampler and quick sampler for the record as well. So to do this, I just need to click here and enable the flex icon and follow tempo. And I'm going to be playing at the regular speed. And to see these parameters, just make sure zone and mapping are showing here. But with this showing and this enabled, I can now transpose and it'll maintain the speed. A lot of artifacts up high, of course. But the speed is maintained. And you can get into some creative cross rhythms by maybe triggering different notes at different start points. So you can have lots of fun that way. So that's one idea. All right, let's close this up. And I'm going to take this same loop and just drag it to an audio track in an empty space over here. And I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to convert to new sampler track. Now here I have the option of converting it based on regions. And in this case, it's going to be one region, or I can convert it based on transient markers. And that's what I'm going to choose for now. And I can have it create a sampler instrument or Drum Machine Designer or Alchemy. But let's leave it as sampler for the moment. I'll just leave the default name. And I want the trigger note to start maybe at C2, a little bit higher, like that. And we'll click OK. And there it's created it. So if I open the sampler instrument, we'll see that if we click on the zone area, that it's all mapped out to individual slices starting at C2. So I can now trigger these, create my own patterns by sequencing them, or maybe use these in addition to the actual loop to enhance it. For example, I'm going to actually mute this region and we'll put this one on to play back and loop it. And I can now just use this to trigger additional hits. And I just triggered a few random notes to give you an idea of what's possible, but some selective notes in the holes can really help augment the feel of a groove. Now let's look at another way. I'm going to take this same loop, drag it here to another one, and I'm going to go to Quick Sampler Optimized. We've seen this before, but what I can do with this mapped out in this slice mode, and by the way, we can use it in one shot where we trigger the whole sample, and Classic where we get the pitch shifting. But let's say we're going to leave it in slice mode, and with this loaded in, I'm going to switch this to sampler. And this is kind of a little backdoor trick not a lot of people know about. It'll now open it in sampler already sliced up if we look here in this map format. In this case, starting at C1. And if one were so inclined and wanted to dig deep into sampler routing, you could switch this to the multiple output version of sampler. And then when you open this, you can then go into the groups and actually map the individual slices to individual outputs. Although if you do want to go this workflow, I'd suggest using the Drum Machine Designer method. It's a little simpler to set up. And using Apple Loops with sampler like this is yet another way to transpose individual slices. We simply go into the zone module and we can transpose them there. If you want to dig deeper and learn more about sampler, check out the Logic Pro 10.5, 10.6 Update Explained series. I'll see you for more in the next video. There's a world of sound design possibilities when you combine Apple Loops with the different algorithms in Alchemy. Here's a guitar pattern. I'm going to drag it over a track header and we can create an Alchemy instrument with any of these processes. Let's start with additive and we can basically tweak until we get some interesting variations. And let's add another process here. Let's go for a third. And we can go with a complex waveform rather than a simple sine wave. Number of partials. And here we can start later in the file. Maybe somewhere around there. And let's slow down the modulation. We can maybe have it go forward and backward. And from there, we can create some interesting rhythmic effects, maybe with the arpeggiator. Let's set it to random, and we can create a shorter pattern and mute some of the steps, create different velocities. And then we can tune the different steps. And then create some panning. All that from a simple guitar part. Here I've tweaked the pattern slightly, and I've added in an Apple loop of a percussive combo. And then I took this same combo and created a Drum Machine Designer track with it to add in some extra hits. Some extra snare and kicks to make the pattern a little more interesting and varied. So just an idea to tweak your imagination of some of the possibilities with Apple loops and alchemy. See you for more in the next video. Here I've created a second alchemy instrument based on an Apple loop, this time a mallet sound, and using the granular mode, and also created another short rhythmic pattern, and it sounds like this. And combined with my percussion Apple loop and the Drum Machine Designer instrument with some extra hits. Now let's look at working with Apple loops and live loops. If you're inclined, you can easily trigger them from live loops. For example, here's some bass sounds. And they're all variations. So what I'm going to do is go into my split screen mode so we get some live loops. And I'm going to grab a bunch of these. Let's go to some of the end ones. I'll just grab these and I'm going to drag them all onto this track here. And we can trigger them in real time and record the performance. Let's set the quantized start to every half bar or half note so that we can get some syncopations where we have the pattern starting in the middle of the bar, and we can trigger these in real time. Practice like that. But let's hit record and see what we can come up with. So there we go. A combination of performances from different parts of the bar of each of these loops. Let's switch out of the Apple Loops mode, make sure we're playing back everything from here, and we can listen to our performance. So that's just a random idea. Some bars work better than others, but of course we can go in and edit the MIDI notes to our heart's content, and we can switch different patterns and experiment that way, which could be interesting actually just for some serendipity. So that's an interesting way to experiment with Apple loops if you're inclined to using and working with live loops. All right, I've modified the bass slightly by selecting some different variations, and I muted one of the alchemy parts and dragged in a guitar solo, and it's sounding pretty nice. All right, now here's another thing we can do. I'm going to mute this for a moment. Here's another guitar solo that I brought in, which also sounds nice. Now, we know that we can use the region parameters to time stretch or compress Apple loops up to 8 times the original speed. But if you want to go more than that, maybe for sound design reasons, you can always convert it to a regular audio file. And this will allow you to also do some non-destructive editing in the audio file editor. So let's say I'm going to just cut there. I'm going to take the beginning part. And I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to go convert to new audio file. So let me just change the name. And more importantly, you're going to change the file format here from CAF to AIF. And let's hit save. And you'll see, I'll just zoom a little bit. You'll see the icon has changed now, where we're not getting the Apple Loop icon, but the regular interleave stereo file. And now I can option drag and really go beyond the 8 bars if I want to really get some dramatic effects, which could sound interesting. And let's go in here and I can maybe reverse it. Again, just to show you an idea of some of the things you can do once you've converted it to an audio file. Maybe I'll drag it out even more with the option key to stretch it some more. And maybe that'll work underneath our solo. All this to say that there's interesting sound design possibilities. So converting to a regular audio file will allow you to go beyond the limitations here and also perform any destructive edits that you normally would with a regular audio file. And finally, I want to give you one last tip. Don't forget about some often overlooked Apple loops that are useful for sound design, like transitions, risers, sweeps, whooshes. For example, I'm going to type in riser here, and let's just sort by tempo. And there's all kinds. I can type in sweep. Here's riser. And these are easy to drag into your songs that make great transitions. For example, here, I'm going to play this little 2-bar pre-chorus or hook that leads into a chorus. So maybe I want to use that little riser as a lead-in to the chorus. I'm just going to drag it to an empty space here. And I want to position it so the end of it is peaking right around there. I'm just doing it by eye for the moment, but let's listen. Of course, just bring it down in the mix a bit, add some reverb, and so on, and you can get an interesting kind of effect. And there's all kinds of hits and whooshes and risers and transitions. So some useful search words are riser, transition, whoosh, swish, hit. Maybe you want to have another hit right on that downbeat. Even something like that could be interesting, pitched down for the downbeat of that chorus. So that wraps up our look at Apple Loops. This is Eli Kranzberg signing out. I hope you've found this useful and gotten some ideas that you might not otherwise have thought of. There's a lot of possibilities when you look beyond the immediate drag and drop use of these 2 and 4 and 8 bar loops. So enjoy, explore Apple Loops, and I'll see you for more next time.